We've got the latest episode of The Connors, Possums, Pregnancy, and Patriarchy. Let's talk about it. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It, and welcome to my Connors review for episode, 15 for season 5. It is called Possums, Pregnancy, and Patriarchy, and I review the Connors every single week that there is a new episode, so check out all of my previous reviews on the channel here. They're in playlists as well for easy access, and please consider subscribing down below there. We are just a hair under 1,100 subscribers. That's my next milestone, so I'd love to have you aboard on that train. But comment below too. What did you think of this episode? I love interacting with the Connors fans every single week. So this is the latest episode here in a string of new episodes. We've got 2 upcoming weeks of brand new episodes as well. So a lot of exciting stuff. But this is an all in the family kind of episode. We have Mark, Harris, Ben is here, all of the main cast members except of course Jaden Ray. She's in 2 episodes a year, so why would we see her? So she's absent, but everybody else is here from the main titles anyway. We didn't see Katie Segal as Louise, of course, but anyway, this is really a two-hander, I would say, in terms of the A story. I don't think any story gets particular preference. I think they give pretty even time to both. So let's just kind of go in order of the episode title. So Possums and Patriarchy actually are together. It's really, that part, and then the pregnancy part is separate. So the possum is very easy to explain. There's a possum in the garage at the new house, and Darlene and Becky want Ben to get rid of it, and so he gets all scratched up because of that. But the main part with Ben is the patriarchy. So basically, they are all living in this house together now with Beverly Rose as well. Darlene is still out of work, so Ben is covering her share of the rent, but Becky also is having trouble coming up with her portion of the rent, so Ben's kind of pulling triple duty with that, or I shouldn't even say rent. I guess they own the house, so it's a mortgage, not even rent. So he's dealing with that, but at the same time tasked with 18 other things, including taking care of Beverly Rose's tie-dye shirt project because Becky doesn't really have the time. And this is something that came up, last week in the episode, or was that just last week? Yeah, I think it was, where, Becky was saying, I don't have enough time with Beverly Rose. It's hard for me to, find time for work and school and my own daughter. Something that actually comes into play a little bit in the pregnancy plot, which we'll get to, but in any event, Ben is sort of tasked with all these things, and he feels kind of the weight on his shoulders. And so he ends up blowing up at Dan for something that Dan did at the hardware store without, asking permission of Ben or whatever. And so they had a little bit of a rift there, but I think Dan, understood where he was coming from, and Dan's always been, a level-headed kind of dude. So the next scene, we see the two of them. They're sort of talking about how now most of the family lives with Ben in his and Darlene's house, as opposed to Dan's house. And he's like, I feel like I'm drowning. I can't get a handle on this. And Dan sort of assures him that he will get there, but that it's not going to be easy, but he will figure it out, and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting when we think about the history of this family. They've all at one point or another in their adult lives lived under that roof. Even DJ, I guess, at one point, right, was. But Darlene obviously moved back in recently, and so did Becky, into the basement with Beverly Rose, and this, that, and the other thing. And so Dan has a very full house, and now it does fall on Ben's shoulders. Everybody's sort of migrating over there, and that falls into the pregnancy plot line as well, which we'll talk about. So yeah, I loved that. A lot of humor there, a lot of good jokes, and I love the Ben character. I've said this so many times, but I'm glad that he and Darlene got back together. I knew that was sort of where that was going last year when they had split up. I figured, since he was still a main part of the cast and he was running the hardware store where Dan worked, that they would end up getting back together. But I'm really glad that he has become a part of the main cast, because I just love him. I think he's hilarious. And I mentioned this before months and months ago, but I've been watching old episodes of the 90s show Evening Shade. Well, I guess they're all old episodes, right? It only ran for 4 years in the 90s. But J.R. Ferguson was Burt Reynolds' teenage son in that show. And it's so interesting, because he's probably 16 or 17 or whatever, but he's still so far away from the character of Ben that we see today, with the big beard and sort of the very deep voice. And so it's kind of interesting, because I never really took notice of that actor. Well, I shouldn't say until this show, because he was on a couple of failed sitcoms in recent years as well. But I think Living Biblically was probably the main one. But I didn't know him as a child actor, because I didn't watch Evening Shade when it was originally on. But anyway, so it's great to see him with that. But all right, let's get over to the pregnancy plot line, because I think that's probably the juiciest to talk about, and that is Harris's pregnancy. When I read the episode title, I sort of figured that's where we were going with this. But in the beginning of the episode, Dan comes in and is like, "Hey, there's a bunch of weird targeted ads on my Amazon account for this different pregnancy stuff or whatever." And so Jackie realizes what's going on. Harris kind of sends her a nonverbal cue. And so Jackie's like, "Oh, okay, Harris is the one who's pregnant. Let's, spin this." And she says, "Oh, that was me. I was looking up stuff for the one guy at the restaurant, and he's having problems, but he's cheating on his wife, and his wife can't know, and this, that, and the other thing." But she has a great heart-to-heart with Harris upstairs about what's been going on. And we find out it is this dude who we saw, I guess, at the beginning of this season, right? I forget his name even of the character, but he got her pregnant, and he was basically this, kind of trash ball, person. I think, what was the story? You'll tell me in the comments. But he was like kind of rich, or he came from a rich family, but he was, basically living off of other people and taking advantage of them and this and that. So they kept referring to him in this episode as a hobo, which I just think that's a funny word. We don't hear that very often these days. But Jackie has a nice conversation with her, but then the cat gets out of the bag when Dan offers her a beer, which is interesting, because I think I just said either last week or the episode before that I love that Harris and Dan have kind of become drinking buddies, ever since she's turned 21, and we see them all the time just sort of palling around. I think it was last week's episode. And so Dan offers her a beer at dinner, and she declines it, and all of a sudden, like, everybody kind of knows, because they're like, "Wait a second, why would Harris not be drinking a beer?" And so the cat sort of got out of the bag with that, and Jackie, confirms it. So then we all have to sort of figure out as a family unit, okay, what are we going to do about this? Everybody sort of talks to her individually. Mark has a moment with her where he's like, "Look, you basically were a mother to me once Dad left, and, Mom was working all the time. So, I think you'd be a great mom." Darlene, of course, has her own opinions about it, that she should, either terminate the pregnancy or give it up for adoption or whatever. There's, some back and forth with that. And then Becky seemed to be in favor of it, which I mentioned, it sort of goes back to her and Beverly Rose, her own daughter. But, she was saying that, being a mother of Becky's age is not the best for a young girl, in her opinion, because it's hard to play games, physical, play tag and all that kind of stuff. I think Becky's doing a good job, but of course with the whole going to school and everything, that makes it tough. But here's what's interesting about Darlene's whole opinion about this, and they bring this up, they touch on it, but famously in this family, everybody's kind of a young mother, right? I mean, Roseanne and Dan had Becky fairly young. Darlene had Harris pretty young. And so, she doesn't really want that trend to continue and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, I sort of have my own feelings about that, because it's like, if Darlene is basically saying to Harris, like, "Well, you should get rid of this baby, you're too young, da 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 da," but she's actually older than Darlene was when she had Harris, it's almost like saying to Harris, I sort of regret, the decision to have you kind of thing. I don't know. That's not how it played off in the show, but that's how I think I would take it if I was Harris in that situation. I don't know. Maybe I'm just, not thinking along the same lines as most people, but I might take that a little personally, I guess. So whatever, take that for what it's worth. But it is interesting that they're doing this episode now because obviously, Roe v. Wade is being overturned in some states and maybe nationwide, and all of this, and it's been obviously a hotly contested item for the last couple of years politically, and it did make me wonder because of course when Roseanne season 10 came on, Roseanne the character and Roseanne Barr, were big Trump supporters and this and that. And I wonder if this storyline would have sort of even been brought up if Roseanne was still on the show. Look, I don't really trash, the person, Roseanne, on these videos because I have such fond memories of her in the 90s, as that character. But yeah, it did make me wonder, like, okay, would they be covering this topic if Roseanne Barr was still a part of the show? To be completely honest, I don't think the show would still be on if Roseanne was part of the show because you look at all the other reboots that are out there, most of them do not last 5-6 years. This is season 5 of The Conners, but season 6 really of the reboot. Even Fuller House, I don't think got that many seasons. So I don't know. Maybe because it's sort of this different amalgamation of the show, it is able to continue. But yeah, I wonder, I often wonder, not just from this episode, but if Roseanne, did sort of get herself fired, what does that look like? Is this show still currently airing, in that parallel universe? I don't know. But the storyline definitely made me think about her and Dan having a similar thought back when they got pregnant with who would become Jerry Garcia. And of course, they briefly mentioned him in the first episode of the Roseanne season 10 reboot, but he's for all intents and purposes disappeared from existence, and been retconned in terms of this timeline, as has Jackie's son Andy, which I do think is unfortunate, but that's neither here nor there. I've discussed that with you guys in the comments so many times, because I do have some feelings about that, but whatever. In any event, in this universe, Jerry Garcia never existed, so in that sense, I guess they can't really lean on that particular storyline to say, oh yeah, mom had, similar thoughts or whatever when she got pregnant later in life. But, as a sitcom aficionado, a TV historian of sorts, of course, obviously my mind goes to the Maude two-parter in the 70s where she got pregnant a bit later in life and had to decide whether or not she was going to abort the child. It was, at the time, a huge deal. Maude's Dilemma, I think, was the name of the episode. And, Norman Lear, the creator of Maude and All in the Family and all these other shows, he really pushed hot button issues like this. Roseanne and the Conners have certainly had their moments of, intense drama, and we just talked about it a couple of weeks ago when Estelle Parsons was on, and they had the whole dementia plot line going on. So yeah, some heavy-handed issues, but not usually of the political sense necessarily. And so it's interesting to see that really rear its head. I mean, Roe v. Wade was specifically mentioned, and, even with the scene with her and Becky, they kind of talked about, wow, I'm glad we live in a state where I can get an abortion, if I want one. And look, I have my own personal views on that we won't go into. This is not a political channel. But I think it's cool that sitcoms are still able to have those conversations. And I wonder, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the right-wing people, the Trump supporters, sort of left the show after Roseanne left anyway. So I don't know if anybody's really going to be up in arms about this episode, because I think a lot of the people that would be maybe are no longer watching. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, I thought it was a really well-written, discussion type episode. And there was some humor in there too. Certainly in the opening scene with Jackie trying to sort of run interference with the pregnancy news. But I think a lot of the humor came with Ben and his stuff. So, I'm really torn. I think either of these people could get the MVP of the episode, because I think this is one of the great Harris episodes. We've been so back and forth on this character for so long. I think this was a really strong episode for Emma Kenny, but J.R. Ferguson, I thought, had a lot of really good scenes. He had, certainly some of the funniest laugh lines, but also had a nice touching sequence with Dan towards the end. But you know what? I think I'm going to give MVP of the episode to Emma Kenny, because I don't know when she's going to get it again. I've always kind of liked her. I know you guys in the comments have been back and forth with her, but has she ever been strong enough to be my MVP? I mean, I've only been doing the MVP thing about a year, but and my guess would be probably not often. Right, so I'll give this one to her. I think she did a great job this episode, both with the humorous lines and a real life dilemma. It is interesting though. I mean, she is 21. Yeah, okay, she's not married. Yeah, okay, the family has no money. Yeah, she's not even with the father anymore. But I don't know. It's not like she's 16 here. It seemed a little shocking to me, other than the fact that the family has no money, but they've never had money. And that brings me to actually the blending of those two plot lines too, is that at the end of the episode they decided that Darlene decided for everybody that Harris is going to move in with her and Ben and Becky and Beverly Rose, and so adding one more mouth to feed there, and more responsibility for Ben, as she kind of jokes to him, oh, you're going to take care of this kid just as the same as everybody else, because you never had one of your own, so this will be like your first kid too, and this and that. The last thing Ben wants to hear. So I did like how they really did merge those two plots tonight. So anyway, grade wise, I thought this was a really strong episode, another good one. I'm gonna leave Possums, Pregnancy, and Patriarchy with an A minus. So, all right, thank you so much for watching. We have another new episode next week, and then the week after that, too. But check out the other stuff on my channel. A lot of movie and TV reviews. In fact, one of the Connor's companion pieces, Not Dead Yet, the new sitcom, I just recorded a review about that will be up in a couple of days. So you can check that out as well if you're interested in that show. But all right, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time on Dan Reviews It. Bye.